There is a god in the Egyptian pantheon whose name was chiseled off temple walls, whose statues were smashed, whose image was scratched out of sacred carvings so aggressively you can still see the gouge marks today, 3,000 years later. A god who was once celebrated as a hero, the protector of the sun itself, and then systematically rewritten into history's first great villain. A god pharaohs proudly named themselves after, whose armies marched under his banner, who held the cosmos together every single night. And then erased. Not forgotten through neglect, erased deliberately, furiously, with chisels and ideology and a millennia-long campaign to make sure future generations would only ever know one version of him. His name is Set. The Egyptians called him the Lord of the Desert, the instigator of confusion, the Red God. We call him the God of Chaos. And the story of what they did to him and why is one of the most fascinating and unsettling stories in the ancient world. Before we get into the erasure, before the chisels and the smashed temples and the propaganda campaign that lasted centuries, we need to understand who Set actually was at the beginning. Because the story most people know is the ending of his story, not the beginning. And those two things look almost nothing alike. Set was one of the first 5 gods born from Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. His siblings were Osiris, Isis, Nephthys, and Horus the Elder, the founding generation of the Egyptian divine family. From the very beginning, he was one of the most powerful beings in existence. He was the god of the desert, storms, chaos, and foreign lands. His name translates most accurately as instigator of confusion and destroyer. His sacred color was red, the color of the desert sand, the color of the brutal sun, the color of danger and power and foreignness. And his appearance is one of the strangest in all of mythology. He took the form of what Egyptologists simply call the Set animal, because no one can agree what it is. A tall canine body, a long curved snout, somewhere between an anteater and a jackal, squared off upright ears, a forked tail. The ancient Egyptians clearly knew exactly what they were drawing. Modern scholars have been arguing about it for over a century, comparing it to aardvarks, oryxes, wild donkeys, fennec foxes, even animals that are now extinct. The Set animal remains deliberately composite, a creature that belongs to no specific category, which is fitting for a god of chaos. Here is the thing about Set that the later propaganda will go to great lengths to hide. He was essential. In the earliest Egyptian cosmology, chaos and order were not opposites to be destroyed. They were forces to be balanced. You couldn't have the fertile Nile without the barren desert. You couldn't have civilization without the wild margins. You couldn't have order, what the Egyptians called ma'at, without something to push against it. Set was that push. He was the divine embodiment of everything raw, violent and untamed in the universe. And that made him not a villain, but a necessary force. The Egyptians were deeply pragmatic about their gods. They didn't expect them to be good. They expected them to be useful. And Set was enormously useful. Every night in Egyptian cosmology, the sun god Ra made his journey through the underworld, the Duat, in his solar bark, fighting his way through 12 hours of darkness to rise again at dawn. Every night, the great serpent Apophis, the embodiment of total annihilation, attempted to swallow the bark whole and end the sun forever. Every single night it was Set who stood at the prow of Ra's boat and fought Apophis back with a spear, alone, in the dark. Let that sink in. The being who protected the entire world from eternal darkness, every night, without exception, was Set, the god of chaos. The Egyptians fully understood the paradox. It takes a certain kind of violence to defeat violence. It takes a god who is unafraid of disorder to stand against a force that would unmake everything. Set didn't fight Apophis, despite being the chaos god. He fought Apophis because of it. Order cannot defeat formless destruction. Only something equally raw and fierce can. This was not a minor role. This was the most cosmically important thing that happened every single day in Egyptian religious belief. And Set performed it faithfully, every night, for thousands of years of mythology. Set's cult center was the ancient city of Nubt, City of Gold, one of the most important pre-dynastic settlements in Upper Egypt. Long before the pyramids, he was worshipped there as a primary deity. Around 2700 BCE, a pharaoh named Peripson replaced the traditional Horus symbol in his royal name with a Set title, identifying himself with Set rather than Horus. His successor, Khafre, honored both equally, a statement about divine balance. It tells you everything about this era. Set was a god you wanted to be associated with, a god of power, not disgrace. Now we get to the story that destroyed Set's reputation for the rest of Egyptian history. The Osiris myth. Osiris, Set's older brother, was the first king of Egypt, the loved, fertile, the source of civilization and abundance. His wife was Isis, the greatest magician. Set killed him. In the version that became canonical across Egypt, Set tricked Osiris into lying inside an ornate chest, sealed it, and threw it into the Nile. When Isis found and retrieved the body, Set found it again and dismembered it. 14 pieces scattered across all of Egypt. Isis spent years gathering every fragment. She reassembled and resurrected Osiris. Just enough. He became Lord of the Dead, King of the Afterlife, the God of eternal judgment. And from this final union came their son, Horus, the child who would spend the rest of mythology fighting Set to avenge his father and reclaim Egypt's throne. The conflict spans 80 years in some tellings, a divine legal dispute that consumed the entire pantheon. Set tore out one of Horus's eyes. Horus castrated Set. They raced boats made of stone. Even Ra, the highest authority, kept changing his mind. Eventually, Osiris intervened from the afterlife, The throne should go to the son of the murdered king, not to the murderer. The court agreed. Horus became king. Set was defeated. But here's what most retellings leave out. Set wasn't destroyed. In some versions, Ra took Set aboard his solar bark to serve as the eternal fighter against Apophis. Set the murderer, the loser of the divine court, still held the most cosmically critical job in the universe. Because they still needed him. The Osiris myth wasn't just religion. It was political architecture. Every pharaoh was identified in life with Horus, the legitimate king who inherited the throne through righteous succession. Every pharaoh in death became Osiris. The entire framework of Egyptian kingship was built on this myth. The rightful ruler inherits from the rightful ruler, and the chaos bringer, the usurper, the foreigner, the desert, is defeated and subordinated. Set became the theological stand-in for everything a proper pharaoh was not. And every time Egypt faced an enemy, a foreign invasion, a political rival, a challenge to a dynasty's legitimacy, that enemy was characterized as Set. The myth made the erasure inevitable. Once Set was the first murderer, the cosmic criminal, the god whose name itself meant disorder. His temples became liabilities. His statues became dangerous. His image, in the official visual language of Egypt, became something that had to be controlled. In ancient Egypt, erasing a name was not merely an insult. It was a spiritual act of annihilation. Egyptian theology held that a person's name, their Ren, was a core component of their soul. Without a name, there was no identity in the afterlife. To erase a name from stone was, in the Egyptian worldview, to kill the soul of the person who bore it, to destroy their eternal existence. When this was done to gods, it carried the same weight, and a political one on top. A god without a temple, without offerings, without worshippers speaking his name, was a god being slowly starved of the divine energy that sustained him. The systematic erasure of Set happened in phases over centuries, but its most aggressive period came in the late period, roughly after 1000 BCE, and accelerated through the Greco-Roman era, as Egypt increasingly cast Set as the equivalent of Typhon, the monstrous chaos serpent of Greek mythology. Here is what it looked like in practice. His name was chiseled off temple walls, not scratched faintly, chiseled. The gouge marks survive. At Abydos, at Karnak, in tombs across the Nile Valley, you can still see the negative space where Set's name once was. The stone pitted and raw around the absence. His statues were smashed, not merely moved or repurposed, destroyed. The few that survived did so in storage rooms, buried under rubble, hidden in places the erasure teams didn't reach. His image, the Set animal atop the scepter, the composite creature on temple friezes, was replaced. Sometimes with another deity's image, sometimes left blank, sometimes overcarved with Horus's falcon, the direct theological replacement for Set's power. His very image was considered active, not just symbolic, literally dangerous, portraying Set was believed capable of causing harm. Statues and carvings of him were themselves targets of ritualized destruction, not just as political statements, but as protective acts. Destroying the image was destroying the threat. One of the most significant accelerants of Set's demonization was his association with the Hyksos, the mixed Asiatic people who invaded and occupied northern Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period, around 1630 to 1521 BCE. The Hyksos adopted Set as their primary deity, identifying him with their own storm god Baal. They built a major temple to Set at their capital, Avaris, in the Nile Delta. For nearly a century, Set was the official patron god of the foreign occupiers of Egypt. When the native Egyptian pharaohs, beginning with Ahmose I, drove the Hyksos out and reclaimed the country, they didn't just expel a foreign army. They expelled a foreign theology. And Set, already tainted by the Osiris myth, was now doubly contaminated. The god of chaos had been the god of Egypt's conquerors. His name was erased from monuments across the Delta region. His statues were destroyed. All his negative attributes, desert, drought, foreignness, destruction, lawlessness, were emphasized. His positive ones were suppressed. The god who had defended the sun every night was rewritten as simply the enemy of everything Egypt held sacred. And yet the erasure was never complete. It couldn't be. Set's fingerprints were everywhere, woven too deeply into the theological fabric to fully remove. The pyramid texts, among the oldest religious texts in human history, carved into the walls of Old Kingdom tombs, contain passages where Set and Horus cooperate, where Set purifies the dead king, where Set's strength is invoked for protection. These texts predated the Osiris myth's dominance. They couldn't be changed without unraveling too much. His name survived in pharaonic titles. The great Seti I, whose very name meant man of Set, was the father of Ramesses II, arguably the most celebrated pharaoh in Egyptian history. Setnacht, meaning Set is strong, founded the 20th dynasty. Ramesses II himself named a division of his army after Set, described his own battle fury as being like Set in the moment of his power, and had Set and Horus shown blessing him side by side in the reliefs of Abu Simbel. You cannot fully erase a god whose power your greatest pharaohs were explicitly borrowing. The story of Set isn't a simple arc from hero to villain. It moves in cycles, rises and falls across millennia, driven not by theology but by politics. After the Hyksos humiliation, the erasure campaign ran hot for generations. But by the time the Ramesside pharaohs rose to power in the 19th dynasty, around 1292 BCE, something shifted. These pharaohs came from the Nile Delta, the region where worship of Set had always remained strongest, despite the official hostility. They were deeply pragmatic men, warriors and builders who needed a martial theology to match their ambitions. They rehabilitated Set, not quietly, publicly, aggressively, with full state backing. Seti I declared himself man of Set in his very name. He built temples. He restored the cult. Ramesses II ranked Set among Egypt's great gods, used his name in battle hymns, and presented himself in temple reliefs standing between Horus and Set, as an equal inheritor of both divine forces, the order and the chaos, the fertile valley and the violent desert, both necessary, both honored. This rehabilitation was theologically sophisticated. It didn't deny the Osiris myth. It recontextualized Set's role within it, not as simply the villain, but as the wild force that, when properly channeled, made Egypt's enemies submit. The chaos of the desert turned outward, away from Egypt, into its enemies. For several generations, Set was back. Pharaohs named their children after him. Armies marched under his banner. His temples were funded and maintained. And then it ended. As Egypt fell under Persian, then Greek, then Roman influence, cultural pressure pushed toward a simpler theology. The Greeks identified Set with Typhon, their own monster of primordial chaos. In Greek hands, Set lost all complexity and became simply the enemy of everything good. His temples were neglected, his images destroyed. By the time Egypt converted to Christianity, Set had become the template early Christian writers used for the devil himself, the adversary, the murderer of the righteous king, the force of chaos opposing divine order. From hero god to cosmic defender to divine villain to the devil's origin story, 3,000 years of rewriting. The story of Set is not just mythology. It is a case study in how power shapes the past. Every element of Set's demonization served a purpose. Associating him with the Hyksos made the expulsion of foreign invaders into a holy war. Casting him as Osiris's murderer made every legitimate king a Horus and every challenger a Set. The theological story and the political story were the same story, told in the same temples, to the same populations across thousands of years. The chisels that gouged his name from stone weren't wielded by priests acting on divine inspiration. They were wielded by priests acting on political orders from dynasties that needed Set diminished to elevate themselves. But here's what makes Set's story genuinely remarkable. It didn't fully work. The erasure failed repeatedly because Set was true in a way that purely political gods are not. He represented something real. The violence of the desert, the unpredictability of storms, the necessity of force in a dangerous world. That reality kept pulling him back. The pharaohs who needed to win wars kept reaching for him. The armies that needed courage kept invoking him. The sun that needed defending every night kept needing someone willing to stand at the prow of the bark and fight. You can't erase a force of nature. You can only rename it, suppress it, drive it underground, and it will resurface. Because the thing it represents never went away. The Egyptians understood this too, in their more honest moments. That's why, even in the final versions of the solar myth, even after 3,000 years of demonization, Set was still on the boat, still fighting Apophis, still holding back annihilation. Even a god condemned by history gets to keep his most essential job. If you want to go deeper, Horus, Osiris, the mythology of the pharaohs, the complete story of Ma'at, and how order and chaos shaped one of history's greatest civilizations. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.